All right, cool. The red dot's up. So we will get Thomas in here in a second. And then when he joins, we will be good to go. So in the meantime, welcome everybody to the very first episode of Under Review. My name is Joe DeRosa. You can call me the rookie, I guess, because I'm new to the Cover One scene. Some discussion today about the 2023 sophomore class, where we're just going to go through the relevant players and just kind of talk about, what we saw from them, what we can look to expect in the next year, kind of maybe if you want to call it a 5-year plan of if these guys are going to be with the team, for certain cases. And, obviously this morning, if any of you Cover One followers saw the Terrel Bernard article, we will be talking about that as well as him. And I'm sure it'll be fun. But before we get going and once he joins, I just want to say, shout out to all the guys at Cover One, Eric, Aaron, Greg, literally every person, Uber, David, thank you guys for joining. Being new here, not really knowing anybody, it's super cool to get excited here, or super cool to get started here. I'm super excited for it and just appreciate you guys letting me get a chance to talk about football.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us on.
This is like one of my favorite parts about just like talking about or like being a part of Cover One or being a part of just like the Bills content creation community is you literally get to talk about football, and sometimes people listen, sometimes they don't. But at a minimum, like it's just three guys chatting about football. That's awesome.
That's right.
Yeah, man. And like I was, it's been a lot of work to get to this point too. So it's super gratifying just to be here because all that behind me did not exist 2 weeks ago. That was a lot of frantic Amazon ordering. That one's IKEA, but that was Amazon ordering and just getting everything here as soon as I could, and sending pictures to Eric in the group chat, just making sure that people approve of it. Because it would have been a little problematic if I sent that and they were like, "Dude, that looks like shit." You know what I mean? Yeah, man. Well, I mean, I guess right now we could just kick off the discussion. Because I think Thomas's PC is just having issues, so no worries there. We're all about laid back on the show, roundtable, kick it, talk about things, and no stress. So let's get going with talking about our last year's first round pick, and that is Kaiir Elam. So I have him down for 30 games, 33 solo tackles, 2 picks in back-to-back weeks, 4 passes defended, and I think when we talked about the discourse about Kaiir Elam, to me, it seemed like he was kind of a late bloomer. I don't want to say that he didn't have the talent coming in, because when they drafted him out of Florida, we knew he was kind of a versatile corner, excelled in press coverage, which is good when you have to deal with the speedy receivers in the AFC East now. But it felt like, the rotational component and kind of the coaching staff felt like he didn't really have that, I guess not ready enough to get that full CB2 role. But later in the year, we were seeing more of him, and that playoff game against Miami especially, even though it was Skylar Thompson, he shined, and he had a couple of really big plays, including the game-winning pass breakup. So just curious what you guys think about him as far as what you saw, what you hope to see about him next year.
So, I mean, what was interesting with Elam is they obviously drafted him to be the guy opposite of Trey White, but also to sort of help fill in while Trey White was recovering from his ACL tear from the year before. They started the year by playing, Dane Jackson and Christian Benford on the other side, who was somebody we'll get to later, obviously. But he was the 6th-round pick from Villanova, and it was kind of like, okay. And it's not that Elam was like benched or anything. It was just that he just sort of got worked into the rotation, which they like to do, obviously. But it just always that they felt more comfortable starting a different rookie than their first-round pick. It kind of felt like they were just a little too cautious with Elam for most of the season. And obviously getting to the point where he was deactivated at, what was it, the Patriots Thursday night game, right?
Yeah, it was later.
Yeah. Yeah. Somewhere around that game. And it was just like, I feel like this regime sometimes tries really hard to not put guys in a bad position, and always try to have like the right answers for things. But if you want your rookie corner to grow and, get into this role that you want him to be in, you just gotta have to let him go and take off the training wheels and just have him, give up some plays and also make some plays. I mean, he had that in that first Chiefs game in the regular season, that end zone interception was huge. And I don't think Christian Benford's making that play. I don't think Dane Jackson is making that play. It was a legit interception off of a classic Mahomes scramble that probably 8 or 9 times out of 10 would have been a touchdown, I think. But this is the sort of thing, especially with the cornerback position, which is very volatile and very difficult. It's difficult for rookies to adapt at that position. It's just hard to play that position year to year. It's just so up and down year to year. But in my opinion, they kind of just need to let him be the guy, or at least mostly the guy. If you wanted to rotate Benford because you felt like he was a good player or had a slightly better skill set or matchup in certain situations, whatever, that's fine. That's part of scheme and coaching and all that. But for the most part, you gotta just let the guy do what he needs to do.
Yeah, so I honestly have a theory, and I actually just thought about this morning. I honestly believe that Kaiir Elam would have been the guy the entire season had Micah Hyde not gotten hurt. I think Hyde essentially provided a safety blanket where it's like, all right, Kaiir Elam's going to get beat a few times. Your rookie's going to get beat, and Hyde will be there to kind of bail him out. Well, Hyde gets hurt, and now you put DeMar Hamlin, and it points to Quan Johnson back there, and now the Bills are kind of in trouble. They can't let Kaiir Elam get beat. They're more reliant on him actually maintaining coverage. And that's where I think Dane Jackson kind of stepped in. I know Dane gave up a few big plays, but if you go back and watch a lot of his tape, he's super sticky, and then a receiver just makes a crazy play on him. So I looked at the Dane Jackson kind of over Kaiir Elam situation as more, hey, we know we're kind of safe with Dane. We can trust him to not get blown up every few plays, where Elam's a little bit more risky. Saying that, David, I agree with you. They should have just played Elam. Just let him go. Or at a minimum, rotate him and Benford more than they had Dane on the field. Saying that, though, I actually like Dane Jackson this year. I kind of would like him back as CB4, but we'll see if that happens.
Yeah. He's a restricted free agent, right?
Yeah, and I don't think they're going to tender him. Yeah.
Nah. I mean, and yeah, that brings up an interesting point too about McDermott and really the organization's philosophy about rookies, because a big complaint amongst the fan base, and I'm sure some of us have been, the kind of over babying of these rookies, right? So it feels like they're not really putting them in their immediate position to succeed as often. And with Benford, what was interesting to me is this kid, gets drafted late 6th round, gets kind of works his way up through training camp, shines, gets a spot, but he's playing, and it seems like his presence was there a lot more than Elam. And to me, it almost indicates that when it comes to their higher tier picks, they tend to work them in much slower than I guess you could call it low risk late round pick, because it's, what do you have to lose if the 6th round pick doesn't shine? It's a lower tier, lower risk when it comes to your draft value. But with Kaiir Elam, it's, well, this kid was our 22nd overall 1st round pick. We need to work him in and make sure he's ready to go because we see him as the future. But at the same time, let him play. It's worth it to just see what you have with him. And honestly, trial by fire is kind of going to happen anyways when you're playing cornerback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when Kaiir Elam played, he did make plays. David referenced that Chiefs game. That was a gigantic play, and that's a veteran style play. It reminded me of Jordan. I think it was Jordan Poyer against Tom Brady in 2018 or something, making that big, diving kind of catch in the end zone. And I look at that and I say, yeah, he's a rookie, but he's flashed those abilities all season to kind of make the plays you expect of a veteran corner. Will he get beat from time to time? I bet he does get beat from time to time, especially even in 2023. But at the same time, the Bills, they did baby him. They babied him, I think, a little bit too much for most of the season.
Yeah, I think that you just kind of it's and because it seems like they pick and choose how they want their guys to come into these roles, right? So for someone like Matt Milano, who was a 5th round pick, even though he was clearly better than Ramon Humber, they still started Ramon for a lot of that 2017 season. But once Milano became the starter, they didn't go back to Humber. But then the next season when they drafted Edmonds, I mean, he was the starting Mike linebacker from day one, and they never hesitated to do that. Sort of the same thing with Ed Oliver, and like Ed Oliver's a little different because of the way that they rotate the defensive line and all that sort of stuff. So like it feels very selective. It doesn't feel like it's I guess it just doesn't feel like a very clear process to us. And maybe it's just a position by position sort of thing. Maybe it's just I'm not 100% sure, and I'm not sure anyone outside the organization really knows.
And I definitely agree with that too, because I think we as fans and as people who watch this team definitely approach it with the idea that McDermott is going to want to work you in slowly. And like, not every rookie's ready to go right away. I understand that. But yeah, like to the point that Roy made on the screen, like this guy's a first round pick. Like it's one thing to baby a later round guy who's a big project, but it's also another thing when this is your biggest pick of the draft. This is the cream of the crop. You have to have a guy that you can trust. If you don't trust him right away, then what was really the point if you could have gotten a position that maybe you do trust? So I think Elam is going to develop well. And that's, kind of the next point I want to get to is how we're viewing him down the line, as opposed to this past season. Like, how do we think he's going to do year two? What have you seen from him to indicate that you could see a leap or maybe a step back?
I am very excited to see what Elam does in year two, because I think just the biggest reason why he got drafted, at least in my eyes, or the reason why, maybe it's just the reason why I'm excited, is just that he's a very athletic corner, right? He's got sub 4.4 speed that when you're going to be going against types like Garrett Wilson and Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill for the next, 4 or 5 years. I mean, you need that type of speed and athleticism to keep up with those sorts of guys. And not only that, like you alluded to earlier, Joe, this is a guy who can play in zone coverage. You could do different sorts of things and mix up different coverages with him. You could do the same sort of thing with Trey White. You can do the same sort of thing with Terrence Johnson to an extent. But now that is only the cornerback position. Now with the safety position being so in flux with Micah Hyde's injury, DeMar Hamlin's health, and Jordan Poyer likely leaving in free agency, it suddenly becomes like, how much of that do you really get to do with the corners if you don't necessarily trust your safeties as much? And this is all very, very speculative at this point, just because we don't know what's going to happen at the safety position. Just a lot of that, but for now, it's just sort of like, I'm excited because I think that Elam's athleticism and the way that he finished the season and the way that the coaching staff seemed to trust him more at the end of the season makes me feel like putting him opposite of a fully healthy Trey White is going to be very, very difficult to win like one-on-one matchups against.
Yeah, and as far as like my perspective on Elam, like I agree, like he's going to be the CB2 next year. I'm fairly confident of that. I do have an optimistic view, and I don't know if this is just me being an optimist, but Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott have to evolve this defense. I think we saw that against the Bengals. We've seen that time and time again in the playoffs. They have to do something different. And what can you do different? You can take kind of your physical freak cornerback, Kaiir Elam, and use him as a weapon. So my hope is that they go back and they watch that Bengals game. There was that play that kind of went viral where I think it was like 3rd and 3. All the DBs gave an 8-yard cushion. Joe just turned and threw it to Jamar Chase. It was a first down in the red zone, easy touchdown shortly after that. So I look at that and I say, you have this guy that can play press man. He also is going to only get better at zone coverage. You're bringing back Micah Hyde, who, in my opinion, is a better safety blanket than Jordan Poyer. Poyer is a freak of a safety. He's one of my favorite players that's worn a Bills uniform in the past 20 years. But Hyde is a guy that can sit back there and you're never going to get beat for 20 yards. He's just too smart to let his CBs get beat. So you can use Kaiir Elam in a different way as long as you have Hyde on the field. That's what gives me kind of the most optimism for Elam to kind of be that CB2 and be a good CB2 in 2023.
Yeah, and that was like the final thing I wanted to say on Elam too, was his kind of development makes me feel even more calm about the safeties next year, because that's another point of concern with the fan base, with everybody, is, if Poyer walks, and we are sure, I mean, Hamlin has indicated he wants to play again, but how is he going to do. And then you have Micah Hyde coming off that neck injury where, heaven forbid, he gets hit the wrong way again, and we're talking about losing him for the year. And maybe even drafting a safety or signing one. It's makes me feel a little bit better because I think the cornerback room is deep now, which was a problem a couple years ago. And if Elam takes a step forward with White opposite, and you're talking about Benford coming in, if he isn't moved to safety as rotation, maybe they get another corner, maybe they draft one, or maybe they get Dane cheap. That's a good corner room to have in that uncertain safety position. And if Hyde's healthy and Hamlin's healthy and they're playing a full year, then we're talking about, a really solid secondary that, assuming the coaching takes a step forward and learns from the Bengals game, could be a dominant unit this year.
For sure.
So, yep.
100% agree.
Yep. So moving on now, we're going to go to Himothy, Jimbo, James Cook. 16 games, 89 carries, 507 yards. A stat I love, hold near and dear to my heart, 5.7 yards per carry, second most in the NFL for a rookie. 1 fumble on his first snap against the Rams, 2 touchdowns, 180 yards and a touchdown on that Miami game, the receiving end. And then postseason, not as much fun, but he had one pretty good run against Miami, that touchdown run. So when this pick happened, I was excited. I know not everyone was. I love James Cook. I love the versatility of James Cook. I want to see more of that. And I think the biggest point of development I want to see is his pass catching ability, which I thought would have given the Bills a huge advantage going into the season. And while it was used, it felt like it never really blossomed how we wanted it to. Chalk it up to maybe rotation again, or how often he was actually getting snaps. But what do you guys think about James Cook?
I was very lukewarm about the just because it was like, I wasn't a huge James Cook guy. And I felt like the second round was high for him, because I just felt like he was not a super refined running back, like just as a runner. But, it made sense that at the very least, for his rookie season, like the big thing with him coming out of Georgia was that he was a really good receiver. I was like, okay, if there's one thing that Devin Singletary isn't like, solidly good at, is just like making plays in the passing game. It's a wild pick. It's probably still, too high, whatever, but whatever. But then they just sort of didn't use him a ton in that. They didn't, or at the very least, they didn't use him in a supremely creative way. Like a lot of his receptions seemed to be on like checkdowns, which was fine. And part of being a receiving back, or being viewed as a receiving back, is taking those checkdowns, and instead of getting 2 or 3 yards, you're getting 5 or 6 yards, and suddenly you're setting up 2nd and 6 instead of 2nd and 7, or 2nd and 4 instead of 2nd and 7. Yep. Which matters. It matters a lot. But you also, had to work this guy into the rotation a little bit more. And, thankfully, for the most part, they had Singletary early on in the season, who kind of cooled off by the end of the season, but Cook was able to come on later in the season. And I think that there were specific concepts that they were able to like hammer out and be like, this is this type of runs that we can do. And once they figured that out, then they just sort of hammered those concepts. And Cook was pretty solid on those concepts, or he, at the very least, he just felt more and more comfortable. Like he was playing faster, like he wasn't hesitating and stopping in the holes as much. He was just seeing what he needed to see and attacking the gap. And I think that as long as he continues to develop on that track, I'm pretty excited about what James Cook can bring in year 2. I do think that Terry walk. If you watched the salary cap extravaganza on Wednesday, our group voted to letting Nyheim Hines go, and maybe he gets a pay cut, maybe he gets traded, whatever. But at that point, you basically only have James Cook on the roster. And so you would expect they either bring in a real cheap veteran option to pair with Cook, or they draft another running back, which they've done in quite a few of their drafts now since they've taken over. It's been, here, it's day 2, we're going to take a running back. I guess.
It was Moss, it was Cook, and am I missing
Singletary?
Singletary, but after Singletary, was there anyone else in that mix, like late round?
Just
no, not in the late round. I don't think.
UDFA for Blackshear. But other than that, no pick. Yeah. But yeah, for Cook, like I think DF Forever just asked, can we see him starting next year? I see him as the RB1 next year, and this is coming from somebody. If you follow me or follow me throughout the year, I'm a gigantic Devin Singletary fan. I think he's super underrated by the fan base and probably by most NFL fans as being a more than adequate running back for the Buffalo Bills. I mean, he averaged over 1,000 yards a year for his first 4 years with the Bills. He's going to go somewhere else. I don't think the Bills are really going to bring him back on a contract. It's just too much money. But Cook, he became more and more impressive as the season went on because, as David said, he started hitting the hole. And one thing I've noticed kind of with these rookie finesse running backs is what they do is they just hesitate a little bit too much at the start of their kind of career, start of the season, where they're looking for that hole too much. They're not going forward and they'll lose 3-4 yards of play. Cook was doing that early on. It was frustrating to watch. And then suddenly towards the end of the season, you saw him just say, hey, either I'm going to get 0 yards or I'm going to get 15 yards. And more often than not, he was getting 15 yards.
Yeah.
I think that Cook's going to be a weapon moving forward. I want to see him in the pass game more. I want to see Josh Allen using him kind of as a pseudo slot wide receiver. My concern is we've been wanting this from Josh Allen for a few years now to get his running backs more involved, to get the screen game more involved, to do more of these like short bubble passes to running backs. I almost wonder if that's just not Josh Allen's game, and it will never be Josh Allen's game. I don't know. I mean, I do think it would behoove the Bills to do that more because it's going to pull those safeties forward. But can Josh kind of add that to his repertoire? Remains to be seen.
Yeah, definitely. And before I get to the point, just want to give a shout out to Steve. Really appreciate it, man. Thank you for tuning in. And it's cool to see that. With it comes to Josh, I agree with that point, and I really do because it almost feels like he doesn't want the ball taken out of his hands, right? He's gone through this kind of whole development cycle where he was the point of emphasis. He is the star. He's the guy who runs it. He's the one who, can make a play out of nothing. We've grown to expect that from him. It's been asked of him. But I want to see a development in Josh Allen's game where he gets more patient because there is capability to have a successful running game on this roster already. And it happened several times during the year. I mean, under McDermott, this was the best year of rushing they've had. And now you're talking about like that Patriots game, that Thursday night game is my favorite example because they controlled that game using Cook, using Singletary, bleeding the clock, being patient, death by 1,000 paper cuts. It was there. And to me, it felt like it wasn't used enough because a lot of the asking or the expectation was that Allen had to make a play. I definitely think Cook next year could be the back one, but if he's back one and we know this, does that still mean he's going to put up back one numbers, or are we going to get another 600-yard year because maybe they opt out of the run and they decide to throw the ball more? And it's definitely a good point that you brought it up because I think that conversation should be had because in early year, I felt like Allen was finally starting to do that Rams game where he seemed a lot more methodical. The Chiefs game, it felt like he was taking what was given and not really forcing it. Singletary was running down their throat. But later in the year, it just became that Josh Allen show. And I love Allen. I love that he can do that. But I want that to be a back pocket option, not the whole point of the offense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that Rams game, like that, the way the season started, I was like, what is this? I've never seen this Josh Allen. Like it was just a quick two-step drop throw. Like I've never seen him with that quick of a release time. And then suddenly, as the season progressed, that just went away. And I almost think that's not necessarily all on Josh Allen. I think part of it for sure is just Ken Dorsey started changing the play completely. I think he looked at that Rams game and said, we know we have Aaron Donald in the middle of that line. We cannot let Aaron Donald ruin this game. The best way to stop that is get the ball out of Josh's hands quick. And we just absolutely dominated the Rams. Moving forward, they were just like, our offensive line can hold up, or Josh can run the ball to get away from pressure. And as the season went on, that kind of wore down. I feel like wore down the whole team. And we kind of saw that finally in that Bengals game where there was just nothing left for multiple reasons other than the fact that, I think the Bills just wore themselves down throughout the season.
Yeah, it seemed like as the season went on, it felt like when they chose to run the football, they were successful doing it. It was just that they didn't juice to run the football that much. They were just like, all right, we're just going to keep attacking and attacking downfield and being vertical, and that's just sort of how we're going to win games. It's like, okay, but like, the focusing these concepts that you've figured out, just run the football a little bit more.
It was frustrating to freaking watch that, man. And the thing too was like the offense was almost so explosive that it would have been more shocking, especially in the playoffs, to me at least, if they just started checking that down and like taking that slow approach. I felt like they were so ready for them to just try and force it down the field. And like there were so many calls where I watched it and I was like, why are we doing this? We don't need to. It did almost work. Like I think the drop by Davis in the Bengals game where it was like, what, 3rd and 2, and they aired it out like 30 yards. I was fuming, but also he should have had that ball. So, I mean, the explosiveness can work. It just doesn't need to be every week. Does it need to be the point, or can we have this balanced, distributed offense? And can Cook be a center point of it? You know, as a receiver and as the back one, maybe an increase in production from him next year. So it is to be seen. All right, you guys ready?
Yep.
I'm ready. I know Hooper's ready too.
The polarizing, the enigmatic Terrel Bernard, the 3rd round pick that I have, man, when that article came out, I knew it was like setting sticks on fire, but man, this is funny, man. I was very much like shocked by the pick when it happened. I wanted to see how they would use him. I thought because he was a good pass rusher in school that he could be like put in on certain blitz packages or maybe just disguises, but I felt like his presence wasn't really there this year. And you made a great point in your article, Uber, about just how he was, you know, we had a lot of depth already. So he was a depth rotational piece. So I'd like you to, you know, take the floor here and give us the pro Terrel Bernard.
Yeah, so let me start by saying when the pick happened, I was kind of stunned too. I was like, I don't really understand this. I also don't watch much college football, so when you kind of have these under the radar guys, they're not really on my radar, so I don't really know what's going on there. I have to go and do a little bit of digging. As the season kind of wore on, you know, my hope was that he'd be using sub packages, and what I realized is the Bills don't really have sub packages. They have Taron Johnson as their nickel, and they're going to stay in nickel, and they're never going to change, which I actually think there's a benefit to that. But as it goes with Terrel Bernard, right, he really only played in the one game against the Jets. I know people say he played awful in that game. I don't think he played awful. I think he played like a rookie linebacker plays, and he was fine, not spectacular, not horrendous. But for the majority of the season, what Terrel Bernard kind of brought to the Bills was a good special teams player. And I know a lot of people insist that I want more out of a 3rd round pick. So one of the big things I kind of tried to point out in the article I wrote for Cover One, defending the pick of Terrel Bernard, is that the Bills are such a good team now. The roster is so deep that it's very rare they're going to take a draft pick in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round that's going to be a consistent contributor. I know we point to Christian Benford, but if you combine Christian Benford and Kaiir Elam, that's your CB2, especially with all the injuries we had in the secondary. You look at James Cook, he was a kind of rotational piece at running back as a 2nd round pick. And then we get to the 3rd round pick with Terrel Bernard. And I know a lot of people say, well, we should have drafted an offensive lineman. And I know that would kind of benefit us now, right? We literally don't have a second starting guard on the roster at this point in time. That being said, I think we'd be having the same exact argument about a offensive lineman we took in the 3rd round as we're having about Terrel Bernard right now. That offensive lineman would not have played last year. I know a lot of people say, well, Roger Saffold was awful. Well, Ryan Bates wasn't spectacular. They would have put, you know, Dylan Parham is the name that always gets thrown out there. They would have put Dylan Parham in. I wholeheartedly disagree. I think there's about a 2% chance that Sean McDermott was going to yank Roger Saffold off the field, yank Ryan Bates off the field after investing in both of them. So Bills fans would have been looking at that pick saying, why did we spend a 3rd round pick on a player that literally didn't play a single snap his rookie season? Terrel Bernard at least produced on special teams. And actually moving forward, I do think one thing. I think we might see Terrel Bernard. This is a little bit out there. We might see him with a captain, a C on his chest this year as the special teams captain for the Buffalo Bills. They're going to move on from Tyler Matakevich. They're going to move on from Tywan Jones. They're probably not going to bring back Jake Kumaro. So all of those guys that people have been so kind of angry that the Bills are spending money on, and those 3 players alone, you're talking about, I think about $5 million in cap hit last year. Those 3 players gone. Now you bring in Terrel Bernard and you say, hey, you're the guy. You, Saron Neal, and Balin Spector are the guys on special teams. We need one guy in the coverage unit that's going to be the captain. One thing out of college that Terrel Bernard had was they said he's a football guy. They said he's a great leader. Don't be surprised if you see a C on his chest in 2023.
Hot takes here on Under Review, ladies and gentlemen.
So there's some interesting little background sort of things with the Bernard pick, right? So first of all, what gets lost, I think, a lot in that whole pick is the fact that Brandon Beane traded back twice in the 3rd round to make that pick. And I remember that because after the second trade back, I was like, okay, I really need to pee. So I went to the bathroom, I peed out when the pick was being made, and I was like, oh, we waited all that time. It's like 11 o'clock at night just to see a linebacker that's not going to play this year. Awesome. I'm going to bed. So trading back twice to eventually get Terrel Bernard. Okay. They got a couple extra picks, which they kind of needed just to kind of help fill out certain things on day 3. But then the other aspect of this is that there is a sort of Sean McDermott circle of trust, right? So, obviously, this gets made about like, full just to work with, whether that's like Eric Washington or, bringing Ken Dorsey, and a lot of his staff came from that group in Carolina, and even guys like Chad Hall, who he worked with in Philadelphia when Chad Hall was a player there. Obviously he was there, and now he's in Jacksonville, blah, blah, blah. But part of that circle of trust are some college coaches, including Manny Diaz, who when Greg Rousseau was drafted out of Miami, Manny Diaz was the head coach at Miami. And that was someone that I'm sure him and McDermott had a lot of conversations about, because Greg Rousseau only played like a year of college football before opting out because of COVID and then declaring for the draft. And he had converted from wide receiver to defensive end, went from high school to college. So he had only had 1 year playing defensive end in college and then got drafted in the NFL in the 1st round to play defensive end. So there's that. So you imagine that there were a lot of conversations between them about like, can this guy really do this? Do we see the same things are we on the same page about this? Another one of the people that's in that circle of trust is Dave Aranda, the current head coach at Baylor, who back in 2016 was the defensive backs coach and defensive coordinator for LSU when Trey White was there. And Trey White was the captain, the number 18 guy for LSU, which is like their main leadership guy. Like that jersey is given to one player to be the leadership guy. So I think, again, Terrel Bernard is one of those guys that I'm sure, when Aranda and McDermott are having conversations about things, that was probably somebody that he talked about a lot, probably brought up a lot of leadership, as Uber alluded to, just that versatility that he theoretically can bring. All that is to say, I was not a fan of this pick. And and the other part of this, of course, is sort of what people have been bringing up, which is like, so you have the Tremaine Edmonds question right now, which is, do you sign Tremaine Edmonds to this big contract that he is going to be getting from someone, whether it's the Bills or not? But you can't really put Terrel Bernard in the Tremaine Edmonds role because he's not built for that role. If he's built for a role on this defense, it's more for that Matt Milano type role. So when he got drafted, my first thought was, so is this a sign that they are keeping Edmonds and maybe Milano is like trade bait at some point? Like, that was just sort of my initial speculation. I don't really feel that way right now. But I mean, if you were to trade Matt Milano right now, I mean, at any
don't even play that game with me.
No.
Don't play that game with me.
If you want to trade a first team All Pro now, I mean, this is the time to get the maximum return on that. Not that I want to, just throwing that out there. But it's sort of an odd pick, and I do agree with the idea that like Bernard will end up being like the guy that they want to have replace the veterans on special teams, right? which does obviously matters a lot to this team, right? They have spent a lot of money on. So getting a cheaper replacement as a rookie or on a rookie deal, yeah, that's fine. I still think a 3rd round pick for that is.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. That was my kind of takeaway too, because if he is a special teams captain, that's fantastic. I love it. If you can keep him on a cheap deal for however long, if that's really his role in this team, then fantastic. But he's a 3rd round pick, and I know that someone mentioned drought mentality to have the idea that this 3rd round pick is going to be an immediate contributor, but also I still do think that we've seen the Bills draft 3rd round picks that have had a bigger role on the team. And if you're getting this guy at that position to just be a special teams captain, do you think that's worth it as far as where they picked him and what he's actually getting used for? Or do you think that could have been allocated to something that could have been a more, I don't want to say immediate contributor because this roster's deep, but someone who could have developed into that position? And it's not to say that Bernard can't, because maybe year 2, we get surprised and he's on the field a lot more. Maybe they run, like you said, if they decide to create some sub packages for him, then great. But I just don't know if I can wrap my head around using 3rd round pick for Terrel Bernard, a linebacker and a linebacker deep team, just to be a special teams ace, even though that is necessary and valuable. I don't know if I can get it.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest critiques that I agree with is Terrel Bernard, the profile that he's drafted as is Matt Milano's position. Like, that's where he fits on this team. And he's not going to beat out Matt Milano for a starting job on the Buffalo Bills. So he's relegated to a backup. If the Bills had spent basically the same draft capital on a more suited middle linebacker, a guy that's closer to 6'5", 6'3", which is what McDermott looks for at that position in his defense, a la Tremaine Edmonds, who's 6'5", Luke Kuechly, who's 6'3", and then you have Terrel Bernard, who's a low end 6'1", probably closer to 6 foot. I think that people would be a little bit less angsty about this pick because they could see a path where he's the starting, middle linebacker for the Bills this season. Saying that, I don't think it's the worst pick of all time. I don't think it's a great pick. I'm fine if Terrel Bernard's career ends up being a special teams ace for the Buffalo Bills, just because I think the Bills kind of looked at it and said, we need somebody that can contribute in 2023 or 2022, and we still get some sort of value out in 2023. There was, in my head, there was not, at the time of that roster, their offensive line was deep. I think people forget that, you have in the middle in particular, you had Roger Saffold, you had Mitch Morris, you had Ryan Bates, you had David Questenberry, and you had Cody Ford. Now, I know none of those names at this point in time scream, woo, this is wonderful. But at the time, they looked at Saffold as a guy coming off a Pro Bowl season. Mitch Morris is a stud at center. Ryan Bates, they had just given a 4-year contract. David Questenberry had just started 17 games for the Titans, granted at tackle, but he was a rotational piece that could play anywhere. And I do believe that the Bills were hoping that Aaron Cromer could get his hands on Cody Ford and turn him from a piece of coal into a diamond. That didn't happen. He turned into a 5th-round pick. Terrel Bernard, though, again, not horrendous, not great. If he's a special teams captain this year, somebody needs to save this clip, and I'll take all the credit for that in the world.
Yeah. We'll make sure we keep that in our back pocket just in case. We got to move on, but I'll say the last thing on this because I said it in the chat, but my favorite part of that entire thing, the Terrel Bernard saga, is just Kyle Brandt getting out on stage, announcing him, using the term "my man," then having to look at the note card because that was very clearly not his man, remember his name, and then say the pick. I just thought that was, poetry in motion.
Yeah.
All right. Another name. Boom. Khalil Shakir. Gentlemen, 14 games, 10 receptions on 20 targets, 161 yards, average 16.1 yards per reception, 1 touchdown against Pittsburgh. And then in the postseason, 5 receptions on 7 targets, had 91 yards, which I think was 56% of his total, and 18.2 average. So what I took away from Khalil Shakir this year, I was pounding the table to get this guy more involved, especially with the slot uncertainty. The dependence on McKenzie to me was too much. I thought I liked giving McKenzie a shot, especially with the strong training camp, to see what he could do. Wasn't didn't live up to expectations. And what we were talking about with Elam, I know Shakir is far down the draft board, but I thought we could have gotten contributions from him right away. We were seeing flashes from him. And when they got to the playoffs, the fact that he was getting meaningful, receptions in that game to me indicated that they were starting to trust him a little bit more, that they wanted to get him the ball a little more, get him more involved. And that bodes well for me, at least for next season and what his role could be. Even if they sign somebody, even if they draft somebody, it does seem like Shakir has a place being the hybrid guy where he can go out or he can go in. So what do you guys think?
I think you're on mute, David.
Thank you. I didn't want
There
my
you go.
metal water bottle clanging around. So let's start with the slot wide receiver discussion, because that was such a disaster the entire season, right? They were confident that Isaiah McKenzie was going to turn into something that he's never been before. And turns out he's not. Because he was the exact same player as he's been his previous years, which is fine. Like that, there's a role for Isaiah McKenzie on a football team. It's just not as a starting, reliable slot receiver type. So then you're kind of stuck in a spot where it's like, okay, you need production out of the slot position because Josh Allen likes to target the slot receiver position. Away from your boundary guys like Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs. So then they tried to put Stephon Diggs sometimes in the slot. They would get production from that. But then, then they just were put themselves into a position where they're like, what do we do? Because for whatever reason, they did not trust Khalil Shakir during the season to get that role the way they wanted. Part of that is probably his lack of ability as a run blocker. Part of that might just be him adjusting to the playbook. I don't know. This is just speculative at this point. But all I know is that they brought in John Brown and Cole Beasley out of retirement to basically get literally anything out of that particular position, which it just told you how desperate they were for something to come out of there. I like Khalil Shakir a lot. There are plays that he makes that are very, very good. I just don't really know why he's not being used in that position. I'd like to know. I would like to have that mystery solved, but it seems like, we're going to be getting some sort of veteran option and maybe even another draft pick invest. Just because you have, obviously, this will be Gabe Davis's last year under his rookie contract. You have, Khalil Shakir with 2 more years after the season. And obviously you have Stephon Diggs. But, outside of those 3, moving forward after 2023 is kind of like, now you really only have 2. So you need to get, I think, a veteran and an actual draft pick. And I wouldn't mind your, a day 2 draft pick being spent on a wide receiver instead of a running back, or even the first round, depending on how free agency pans out. Although, a name that has been thrown around in free agency has been Robert Woods, which I would absolutely love to see because I have always loved Robert Woods. I think most Bills fans loved Robert Woods when he was here. I would be very excited about that.
Yeah, with Khalil Shakir, I mean, during the season too, I wanted him used more. He just wasn't. Let me just backtrack to kind of the off season. When Cole Beasley was cut because he wanted to leave, and I think the Bills were mutually agreeable to that situation, I was adamant that the Bills were going to miss Cole Beasley, which I had people screaming at me, telling me that I was a moron. I had no idea what I was talking about. The Bills would be better without Cole Beasley. Isaiah McKenzie was a better version than Cole Beasley, which I just sat back and said, okay. Throughout the entire season, the Bills were missing Cole Beasley. They were missing that slot guy that could kind of get open at all times. What Josh Allen did in the previous 2 seasons with Cole Beasley, he'd look for Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs is double, triple, quadruple covered, but he always knew he could look to Cole Beasley and just get the ball to him. Cole would catch it for 5 yards, fall down, get a first down more often than not, what have you. Isaiah McKenzie was just never that guy. I forgot what game it was where he dropped like 5 passes. That was the point where I said, okay, I'm out. Like Isaiah McKenzie is great in his certain role. He's great on those push passes, certain sweeps, being a guy that can beat I forgot who it was, Jalen Mills or whoever when we played the Patriots in 2021. But he isn't a slot receiver. The Bills needed one. Khalil Shakir, I was hoping would be that guy. They just never kind of unleashed Khalil Shakir. He made a couple good plays. He made a few bad plays. As far as moving forward in the future, one thing I look at Khalil Shakir and I say is, Bills fans, I think the majority of Bills fans want the Bills to invest in another wide receiver this year, whether that's free agency with a Robert Woods, with an Odell Beckham, whether that's in the draft with a player like maybe Jackson Smith-Njigba or somebody else like that. Okay, so the Bills do that. Now you have Stephon Diggs, you have Gabe Davis, and you have this third wide receiver that the Bills invested in. That means Khalil Shakir is the fourth wide receiver, right? If Khalil Shakir is the fourth wide receiver in 2023, who was the Bills' fourth wide receiver in 2022? Khalil Shakir. Yeah. So you're not going to see an improvement on his kind of, stat line if the Bills go by way of adding another wide receiver. So in the future, I look at Khalil Shakir and I say, I don't really think we're going to see a big uptick in his usage, a big uptick in his stat line, because I just don't think the Bills see kind of a spot for him currently on this roster.
Yep. I want to bring on Thomas, who just joined. So, all right. It's funny because when he's in the screen, it says Khalil Shakir, but that's not Khalil Shakir. That's Thomas. What's going on, man? How you doing?
I was doing really good this morning until apparently one of my monitors. I'm looking really. This is very transverse for me because normally I'm looking over here. No, I'm looking on this side, so I'm good. We're doing okay.
All right, man. I'm happy to hear it. Thank you for joining. We really appreciate having you here. We were just in the midst of our Khalil Shakir discussion, and we would love to hear what you think about his first year and what you could expect from him in his second year.
So I think it's really difficult with a guy like Khalil Shakir because, I mean, the thought process with the Bills is that they don't give rookies a chance offensively. And I guess at the defensive side as well, you saw with Kaiir Elam as well. I think there's things to be desired. I mean, coming out of college, Khalil Shakir ran the entire route tree. He's got incredible hands. He's a very nuanced route runner. Definitely understands leverage. He understands how to, get a good release. And then one of the things I spoke with Anthony Prohaska. Why my brain's not working? I was talking to him about the fact that Khalil Shakir actually gets more separation on his routes than almost any receiver. Now, mind you, the sample size is a lot smaller, but that is something to be kind of thought about, is the fact that he's able to get separation, which for the longest time was a big issue for the Bills. I think the tough part with a guy like him is you really thought Gabe Davis was going to step it up this year. He didn't. The loss of a guy like Cole Beasley, which we saw, and I know I heard Hansel talking about this, losing 182 receptions from a guy like Cole Beasley, who really was Josh Allen's number one target. I mean, even though Stephon Diggs was the number one, Cole Beasley was the guy that made Josh Allen's job that much easier. He was able to, get that free release, get those easy yards, find himself at the sticks, and make Josh's job a little bit easier. I think without that, without Gabe truly stepping up this year, without a guy like Dawson Knox, I don't think we really saw the fruits of our labor in terms of Khalil Shakir. So I think this year, I kind of obviously heard what Hansel was saying as well. If we take a high receiver, like let's say we take an Addison, right? Or we take Zay Flowers in the first round. I have a concern that might inhibit Khalil Shakir's production, but it just depends on how they feel. Because, I mean, we still don't know what's going to go on Jamison Crowder. Do they want to bring him back? Because I feel like there's some untapped potential with the fact that he never got truly onto the field. And when he was on the field, I think our offense was at its best. You saw the offense kind of flourish with Jamison Crowder. So I think Khalil Shakir has the ability. I don't know if you can necessarily just pinpoint him as a slot receiver, though. I truly think that like Gabe or like Stephon Diggs, I think they could work both inside and on the boundary and be successful. So I don't know exactly. Obviously, his stat line this year was very underwhelming. But if you look at Stephon Diggs' stat line from his rookie year, if you kind of extrapolate on what Khalil Shakir did this year into Stephon Diggs, his rookie year in 2015 in Minnesota, it's really not that far off from the same success rate. Stephon Diggs had like a 13.4 catch per, or yards per catch, whereas Khalil Shakir's was 16.6. Obviously, that's probably not going to stay the same over a larger scale, but you would have to think that he's going to be able to, his ADOT is probably going to be better. So I think, to be honest with you, I think Shakir is going to translate. But again, like Hansel said, I think it's all dependent on what we do in that first round. And I think it's also really dependent if we take an offensive line, because if that offensive line doesn't get better, I'm not sure it really matters how many weapons we have, because if Josh is not going to be able to actually get the ball and have time to process, I think we're going to run into the same issues anyway.
Yeah, I wanted to go back on your point about Shakir's versatility, because I mentioned it before. He is an inside-outside guy. You can have him in either or. What I do like about that is it doesn't handcuff the Bills to have to sign or draft anyone specifically, whether it's a slot receiver or a vertical guy purely. I think they value that hybrid component, which is why I have faith that Shakir would have bigger production next year. Again, you mentioned it. They really struggle with separation. Another thing they struggle with in years past was yards after catch. I think Shakir's capable of getting that too. And that's something that I think they're looking for, why they drafted him and what they could use with him next year. If they don't go the route of receiver in the draft or free agency, obviously that would be incredibly telling of what they think of Shakir. But even if they did decide to go get a JSN or a Hyatt or Downs, one of those guys, I still think Shakir gets a much heavier involvement in the offense, because I think they just, especially seeing that playoff game, to me indicated that they trust him to be in those roles. And he came through. He did have a drop, but he also did have a huge catch as well. I think he's capable, and I think it's going to bode well for his success in year two. Maybe not 1,000-yard receiver, but even if I'm getting 500 or 600 yards out of him, but the offense is flowing well and he's contributing, that's good enough for me for where he was picked, for sure.
And so in regards to Jackson Smith and Jigba, which I'm not even sure if I'm saying that last name proper, but I actually was looking at him prior to, before all this monitor stuff went wild, and I was looking at his yardage, and really it was kind of in relation to Khalil Shakir, because the thought is that JSN is a slot receiver, and in 2021, 88.6% of his routes were out of the slot. So obviously that wouldn't lend itself to that same belief. In 2022, he definitely moved himself more to the boundary than the slot. And then obviously we saw in 2023, his season was cut short. I truly think that there is something of a thought that and I don't know if we could get to JSN, I think he's going to probably go in the top 15. And I think the combine is probably going to jack his stock straight up, similar to like a Darnell Wright. I think those guys are going to do themselves a lot of justice in those moments. I think guys like that you don't really know where they're going to play or how they're going to translate into the NFL could potentially hurt a guy like Khalil Shakir, because when you have a guy like JSN, let's say we draft him, and you have him going up against Khalil Shakir, I don't think that's necessarily going to be like, okay, we're going to move Khalil Shakir to the outside. I think that might put him back in the pecking order and again stunt his growth.
I definitely think it's possible. I mean, I'm not, there's no guarantee with him, but I'm optimistic about him just because what I saw from him this year was very encouraging when he was targeted. But yeah, if you bring in one of those, again, I think this team values hybrid receivers. So if they bring in another guy who can play the boundary or inside, I definitely think they'd prioritize this new draft pick to take more boundary snaps or take more of the outside and force Shakir maybe in the slot. And then if you have someone in free agency, if you bring a Crowder back, it might push him back in the depth chart. So there is the case to be made for a decline in his production, but I don't know. I think just pure optimism on my end is saying he might do better next year, but I completely understand it. I want to go on to our next and final member of this list. I could have gone into the Tenuta or, Punt Gone or any of Balin Spector. Spector, to me, I think is just going to be a special teams guy mainly. But I want to talk about Benford a bit more, because we briefly mentioned him earlier when we were discussing Elam. Benford, I thought, had, for where he was picked in the draft and how he came up in training camp, played very well for the 9 games he did play, having that pick on the bad Kirk Cousins pass. Obviously, I don't think they wanted to bring him into the playoff rotation just because they kind of had that set. I felt like our corner room was pretty solid. Didn't need to reintroduce him. But what were your guys' takeaways about Benford, and what do you think they'll do with him next year?
it's very tricky because on the one hand, you want to use him to feel better about your cornerback depth, right? Because you have no idea if Dane Jackson is actually going to be back. I would like for him to be back on a cheaper deal, but I would imagine he'd get probably a better deal somewhere else to be a starter. But with Benford, when they drafted him, I mean, they specifically talked about the fact that they saw potential to maybe move him to safety. And with the safety position now being so in flux with all the stuff that we've talked about previously with Hyde and Hamlin and Poyer and all that, it's hard to say that that's not a very tempting option to at the very least, start now by committing him one way or the other, either keep him at corner or start converting him to safety. Because if you wait or you try to hedge it and be like, all right, well, he'll take snaps at corner, he'll take snaps at safety, we'll kind of split it in between, then, if you really do need him to be a safety, he's probably not that totally prepared for that spot when you need him to be. And I think that there's potential for him to be a solid safety. I think that, for all the criticisms, both, slanderous and deserved, that McDermott and Frazier get, I think that the one thing that they have always been able to do is take defensive backs and turn them into worthwhile players, unless you're named Jaquan Johnson. And, with someone like Benford, I mean, he was playing well to start the season. He really was. And unfortunately, the oblique injury was, the thing that ended up sidelining him for most of the season. But I think they have something there. I would just like them to, what I want is for them to make a clear decision early on to say, we're going to keep Benford at safety, or we're going to keep Benford at corner, or we're going to, convert him to safety, and we're just going to start that process right now. But I do think that that will probably be one of the questions that will be on the minds of fans, kind of like after the big part off season are over, like free agency and the draft, where we'll have more clarity on like who's actually on this roster, who is going to be staying on this roster, that sort of thing. Then we'll start to really dive into, well, what are they going to do with Christian Benford and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah. Benford, to me, is the pick I'm kind of most excited about to see kind of where he goes from here, right? He came out of FCS Villanova as a super upside guy, boomer bust. Either he was going to kind of not make the roster, or he was going to kind of be a big part with high potential. I want him to move to safety if he can move to safety. And the reason I say that is he showed the talent to be on the field to a point. He beat out Kaiir Elam. He beat out a first-round pick as the starting cornerback. If he's capable of doing that, why would I want to take talent off the field if he's capable of moving to safety? Then you can put Elam on the field, you can put Benford on the field, and you kind of fill that hole that's going to be left by Jordan Poyer when he probably inevitably leaves the Bills, or you create a situation where you have a backup plan for the following season when Micah Hyde probably leaves the Bills, or Jordan Poyer leaves the Bills for the second possible time, let's say. As for Benford, why do I think he could move to safety? So he was a ball hawk at Villanova, as far as I'm aware. He played corner at Villanova, but Jordan Poyer also played corner when he was in college. I'm not saying that Christian Benford's the next Jordan Poyer, but he could have the same sort of skill set. The whole thing is going to be this offseason if Benford can move there. I don't want Benford to be a backup corner if he's capable of being a guy that's on the football field. And I think the other possibility you have here is Benford wins the CB2 spot. If Benford beats Elam out for the CB2 spot, could you imagine this fan base and how they're going to lose their mind when the Bills' first-round pick isn't on the field for more than 25% of the snaps next season? That'd also be kind of fun to watch as well.
Yeah, because we need more fire into the people hate Brandon Bean argument right now.
Yeah, it's always kindling in the offseason. It's been, I said before, as volatile as ever. So anything we can do to just make that even worse is really perfect.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, Hansel and I actually did like a pre-draft thing, and when he had his show back last year, and we talked about Christian Benford actually in quite depth. And I think the one thing about him, and it's intriguing to talk about him moving to safety. Generally speaking, that move is like you've got an old corner who can't really cover anymore, and they still have the great vision and the ability to see the field, so they move him over there, i.e., Aaron Williams. I The weird thing is Christian Benford has safety size. He also has corner size, so like he's perfect. He's right in the middle there. I think he's in a weird spot because no one thought a 6th rounder coming in was going to establish himself as the potential CB2. I think the real question mark here, and I don't know this, obviously, no one knows this, is what happens with Tre'Davious White. We don't know how Trey's going to come out this year and be after that ACL, surgery. I think the one telling statement that Trey said last year was that I needed some introspection, and to be more than just a cornerback, I needed to be somebody outside of football. And that kind of worries me that maybe he doesn't himself have the same clarity or confidence in his own ability, which if that is the case, then maybe Christian Benford then can be that CB2 and Kaiir Elam is that CB1, which is a luxury that I don't think anybody would have thought in one draft that we could have 2 guys like that. I'm hoping that we have a little bit more wiggle room with Kaiir Elam in terms of getting him on the field this year. I was a little concerned with the underwhelming play in terms of like McDermott actually giving him any confidence. But in terms of actual Christian Benford, I think if you look at where he was last year in his actual development, I think he's significantly further along than the average 6th rounder. And I think that bodes itself well for this team. I think if you can get him in that safety position, because I know a lot of people lately have been mocking Antonio Johnson to the Bills at that, first overall pick, first round, excuse me. I'm not as excited about the idea of drafting a safety in the first round. I think that 5th-year option with a wide receiver, with how big that wide receiver number is nowadays, I think that's significantly more beneficial than the alternative. I like the idea. Like, and I know Hansel said this before. I like the idea of getting a guy and having him be versatile. And I know Sean McDermott loves that ideology of having guys that can play all over the field. I think the other part about it, there's so many moving parts and pieces with these type of guys, because we don't know what's going to happen with Tremaine Edmonds. And if you don't have Tremaine Edmonds, that changes the entire identity of the defense too. So I think it's just going to be interesting to see how these guys play out long term. But I think Benford has the tools right now to be a very successful corner from what we've seen. I'm just not entirely positive if it's going to translate into a safety position yet.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion that we're having about Benford, because when we talk about Micah Hyde was playing corner at a time and then got transitioned to safety when he came to Buffalo and played exponentially well with Benford. I mean, if he's proven himself as a corner, to me, I like the idea of him being a rotational corner piece. I like the versatility we have on the roster, but I'm skeptical about transitioning players to a new role within the same team. I just don't know if it will work. And I feel like with this kid and the potential he's shown, do you want to take the risk of him going to safety and not playing well? But it has worked. So there is an argument to be made that it could happen. They could do it this year because maybe they don't want to spend the money on safety or spend high draft capital on safety. They believe in this guy to take that leap, and maybe it does pan out, but that is to be seen. And if it does work, then I'm happy to have that going for next season. All right, man. Well, this was our discussion on the 2023 sophomore class, fellas, the debuted episode. This was a lot of fun. And for all of you guys that tuned into this, I want to thank you personally for the very first show. This was nerve-wracking, extremely nerve-wracking, but also extremely exciting. And I think it went pretty well, fellas. And to all of you, I want to thank you for joining the panel today, having some great discussion. If you guys got something you want to plug it right now. This is your time.
Well, I am the usual co-host for the Cover One Roundup on Monday nights, 7 p.m. If you want to tune in for that, we talk about sort of the news of the week, if there is any, and we have a whole bunch of shenanigans in between all that. So tune in for that. It's always a good time. Me and Kyle Salaki.
I write for Cover One. I'll hop on a show from time to time. I've been informed today that I am state media, though, because of my optimism for the Buffalo Bills. So that's something new I learned about myself today. Other than that, check out the Bills subreddit, Our Buffalo Bills. I help moderate that community. That can be pretty fun at times. It can also be not so fun at times. But yeah, so I'm all over the place.
Hansel, you're a state media fan site.
Yeah, that's
Right.
exactly right.
I am the host of the Buffalo Late Night. It's was on Monday nights. We're still right now. For the past month, I had a son a month ago, a little baby boy, my son Griffin. So right now I'm being a dad, which is the coolest thing in the entire world. That's my focus. So right now, Buffalo Late Night's on a tad bit of a hiatus and a bit of a retooling, bringing some cool stuff back to it. But when that does come back, it'll be maybe Monday, maybe Thursday, not entirely sure, but we do all different types of stuff. Had a variety of different guests, including Hansel, including Greg Thompson or Joe Miller, Sal Capaccio, variety of different people talking all things sports. So, yeah, I don't really have anything to plug because I don't even know when it's happening. So that being said, I appreciate you having me on today for what little bit I was.
And I appreciate you joining, man, especially with how busy you've been. My sister, she had her baby last January, so I obviously have seen the work that goes into that, so I can't even imagine. The fact that you took time out to even join us today is super appreciated. But with all that said, fellas, this is Under Review. We'll be live every Saturday at 11 a.m. with a new Bills topic and a new panel every week. I want to thank you all again for joining us, and we will be back next week. Stay cool. This was the People's Republic of Cover One, according to some. But thank you all for joining. We'll see you next week.